Well, welcome to Learning in COVID-19, Real Talk.
Yes, yes. And it really is real talk.
Yeah, we're planning to have a conversation here today. So even though you're muted right now, we will unmute you. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to raise your hand. Now, it might be at the top of your screen, depends on what platform you are on. But you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you so that you can have a conversation and add your comments, add your thoughts, the things that you're seeing right now during this unprecedented time. Welcome, Michelle. All right, excellent. Well, Deidre, do you want to get started?
Absolutely. I am always ready to talk about learning. So I really just wanted to kick it off with something that I discovered early. I was prepping for a conference and came across a LinkedIn Learning article about the skills that are needed in 2020. So before I get started, I guess I didn't introduce myself. So let me introduce myself.
Yes.
I see I'm reading Wanda. This is emotional intelligence in the work. So
In action.
yes, yes, yes. So I'm Deidra Welcome, founder and CEO of Concerning Learning, LLC, and we make learning extraordinary. So we create learning experiences that are actionable, sustainable, but we also provide consulting. We do things for you. We enable you to do it for yourself. And I also do leap coaching where I help others leap from their 9 to 5 or leap from 9 to 5 to 9 to 5 to 9 to 5 to entrepreneurship. So that's also what I do as well. So have been in business since 2011, but in 2018 took the big leap to a full-time consultant and have not looked back. So excited, coming up on 2 years next month. So I am super duper excited.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I'll jump in. I'm Wanda L. Scott. I have been facilitating training probably since around 1995 as I was a network engineer, but somehow always found my way into the classroom, training other engineers, training my clients, and just fell in love with it so much that I left full-time engineering and went to be, got my master's in education and went and started being a full-time college professor. So there is where I entered my love for technology and education. So I had to keep hold of technology while moving into the education system. So I loved being a college professor, but entrepreneurship is in my blood. I've had my own business since I graduated from school, but the last time took a deep dive in 2016 and went full time. Took a hiatus for about a year in 2018. Now I'm back full time, specialized in instructional design, technology integration, e-learning. But I'm a big nerd. I love education. I love learning. So whenever I can jump in a conversation with wonderful people like Deidra, we jump in, figure out what's going on in the learning space, figure out what strategies are out there, what changes are happening. And as colleagues, we jump in and just talk about everything. And that's kind of what led us to wanting to have this webinar. Of course, being cognizant of what's happening in the world right now, but also just in the midst of a conversation we were having one day, right, Deidre?
Yes, always having a conversation. We'll have to tell them how we connected in the learning space. So
Go ahead.
I'll let you finish.
No,
You
I'm
sure?
done. You tell them.
So we were both speaking at a conference and I was like, who is this lady? I love her presence. Like she was before me. So of course, when you speak and you see who's in the room with you, who you're doing work with, who you're partnering with, looking for opportunities. And I sat really close to the front and I said, I really like this lady. Her whole, so you're always seeing how you can add some learning nuggets to your tool belt. And I said, I like her style. I'm gonna watch her. We're gonna stay connected. And that was about almost a year ago. I don't even know if it was a year ago. I don't even remember. I've lost track of time because the last 4 months feel like 10 years. So I don't know, but it was a long time ago.
It was a while ago.
And we've been connected ever since. We have conversations, we encourage each other. And so we stumbled upon this topic because we were having one of our meetings and we were both like, I'm having a hard time focusing. And it's funny because we take turns. So you'll feel that way and I'm all hyper and excited. And then we'll get on a different call and I'm like, oh, I'm just not focused. I just am having a hard time getting motivated. And finally, we both got on the same page and we got excited at the same time when we started talking about this particular webinar. So that's how we met and how we got here today.
Yeah, that's it. You told the story great. So
thank
you for the compliment. I liked her energy as well. We immediately clicked and said, we need to connect outside of this.
Absolutely.
All right. So we thank you all for your answers, how your learning has or has not been challenged during COVID-19. We spent some time talking through that yesterday. So thank you for your feedback. And it's going to feed into our conversation today. And for those who have just got on, thank you. Welcome, welcome, welcome to this webinar. You will have the ability to talk if you just raise your hands. Click on the hand raise. We can unmute you when you want to join in the conversation. All right. So Deidre, you want to jump in with your slide and start talking about these.
Okay, so let me continue where I started before we did our introduction. So I stumbled upon this particular topic on learning and what are the skills that are necessary for 2020. And so it was really timely because I think it was about March when I saw this, and this prediction that LinkedIn Learning did happened in January. They did this prediction. I think it was like, like the first week of the new year, you get all this predictions for 2020 and here's what we're going to do. So this one really intrigued me because I train people in soft skills. And so I have an affinity and I'm drawn to those articles. So this particular one identified 5 soft skills that are most needed to boost our careers. So it's all tied to learning. And as I said, I saw this in March, but it made me start thinking about, okay, so if those skills were identified in January, now that we're in the midst of COVID, are they still relevant to where we are? Mm-hmm. And what I discovered is they're even more relevant today than they were in January when this article was done. So let me not belabor the point. The first skill is creativity. And that is eliminating that self-talk to try new things. We all have this, is it going to work? I want it to happen the way I want. I'm planning it. And it takes creativity to see past that, to see the potential of something. Mm-hmm. So we're having to be super creative during COVID because there's a lot of people, the first time they've used Zoom is during this pandemic or taking any virtual training. So that is something that people are having to be really creative, which requires us to learn new ways of communicating. So that takes me to
let me
jump in, Wanda.
Creativity also, you said first time they've used Zoom, and a lot of times we focus on work on the workplace. And I want to bring in home life as well and just give an anecdote. My family lives in LA and Texas and Denver, all across the United States, but it took COVID for us to have a family Zoom meeting. Some of that was because the 80-year-olds weren't trying to use technology that way. But creativity, I think as humans, we jump in and find these creative ways to not just survive, but thrive during these times. If you watch local news, they highlight people who are doing amazing things. Or I think there was a teacher who turned his kitchen into his science lab.
Yes, that was cool. I actually want to sit in on this class.
Yeah. So that's the kind of creativity that's needed during a time like COVID.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just thinking outside the box. We're making that real. You know, we've used it for so long, but now you really do have to think outside the box and be creative and innovative. The next skill was persuasion. And this is even more needed now because sometimes we have to persuade people in the workplace, or like you had to persuade your 80-year-old aunt to use the technology. So you have to use those skills to convince them that let's try this new thing. There's been a lot of conferences where people are like, you know, do we have the conference? Do we cancel the conference? What do we do? So you sometimes have to persuade people to, let's do a virtual conference. Wow, that's a novel idea. Let's do a virtual conference. So ATD, Association for Talent Development, they have this international conference every year. We call it ICE, International Conference and Exposition. And it sells out cities. So this year was supposed to be in Denver. We sell out the entire city, like literally the convention center and all the hotels around. Well, they have to plan that like 2-3 years, well, actually 3 years in advance in order to get that book. And so they had to do, I'm sure internally they had to persuade the leaders that, okay, we can't do what we normally do, but what can we do? Let's do it virtually. And so I'm seeing people speaking and people going. And so I think that, you know, sometimes, especially in this time, we have to persuade people to do some different things, which requires some skill sometimes.
Yeah. And can I,
Yes, you can.
Lakeisha, she talked about the engagement that she's having to do, and she's on the call. Did you have any feedback? Well, I thought I saw her. A couple of the attendees said that they're having to do some persuasion when they're trying to engage their employees or engage the people they work with.
Definitely, because if people, like some offices or organizations are used to teleworking or working remotely. I know where my husband works, some people work 5 days a week remotely, but other organizations have resisted the ability or have not taken advantage of working remotely. So they're going to have to persuade some people that we have to do this. We have to turn on our cameras. We have to be camera ready. Even though, you know, sometimes it's hard to put on you have to put on the top, even though you have on leggings or sweats or even shorts at the bottom, because all you can see is the top. So we are definitely doing things like the news people, because, you know, that's the world we're living in. So let me move to the third, collaboration. And this is staying connected, even though we are in different locations, we're not in the office. And for some people, that is taking them, they have to develop some skills to do that. Because it's one thing to collaborate when we're all coming to the office, or it's one thing to collaborate when we're coming to a conference or a training event. But to collaborate virtually is huge. Like, I can't tell you the number of virtual happy hours and virtual networking, coffee chats that I've attended. I've even sponsored virtual happy hour and virtual speed networking. So it just requires us to do it differently, which is a skill. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, collaboration is huge. Now, I've seen both sides of the coin, where there are introverts, and coming out of the technology field, we had more introverts than extroverts. So within platforms like Teams and where people are already forced to collaborate in for other meetings and for to share work with SharePoint and all of the different platforms that people use, they're getting used to collaborating through those mediums. But collaborating while learning is a different story. Most of the time, only time collaboration happens for people when they learn is when they're sitting in a classroom and they're forced to have a discussion, turn to your neighbor, one of the participants, and kind of talk through the information that we just went over. So when we bring that to this new normal, Marva just said that educators has provided the opportunity for amazing collaboration platforms. Yeah, it has, because that's what Deidre and I are doing right now. But Marva, it's also forced a lot of educational systems to have to move into this new normal of learning. Deidre and I were sending videos back and forth about things that are happening across the United States, about the disparities and how learning is impacted. I watched one on Democracy Now! Dealing with New York City and the fact that taking school online crosses socioeconomic areas where their children are hungry. School was a safe place. The ability to learn in an environment that's safe. So all of these things appear to be a help, but it can hurt certain aspects of people. So that collaboration amongst educators, understanding that it might work in your area, it might work in your borough, it might work in your district, but it's not working for the people that I serve. So that collaboration helps to empower us as educators to do the right things for our learners. So there's different ways to collaborate, not for our own learning, but for our learning so that we can empower those that we're working with.
Absolutely. If I could add to the list before I go to the next one that LinkedIn Learning provided, I would say that I would expand collaboration to systems thinking, because we definitely have to, like you said, Wanda, it's not just where I sit and what's impacting me, but it's what's impacting systems. And making a decision in one place impacts other things, and you have to collaborate and discuss that before you can make those decisions. So collaboration is even more important because you have to be able to be adaptable, which is the next one, in order to have some collaboration that sometimes is in the moment. Sometimes you just have to jump on a Zoom call. We do that all the time, Wanda. Hey, you got a moment to chat? And we'll jump on a Zoom call. And, when we were coordinating this, we did that. So the collaboration, we're doing it more than sometimes than outside of COVID, because outside of COVID, you might be at a client site. I might be at a client site, and we can't have those conversations. But now we can have some real conversations in the moment.
Yeah. That is awesome. And we're getting some great questions in the question and answer. And I appreciate you all participating that way. I was just looking at one of the technology, the idea of using this technology. You're learning the technology while you're trying to learn. And so that can be a barrier within itself, which leads, it's right with what Deidre was saying about adaptability.
Yes.
We have to be patient with ourselves.
Yes.
We have to be patient with ourselves because we can't get frustrated just because we're not getting it within the first meeting or the second or the third. We're not supposed to be masters of something that we're not used to using, and not used to using. If you're an educator, if you're not used to using this platform to communicate to your learners, you have to give yourself plenty of time to practice and to set up, and all of these other factors that have come in during COVID-19, the emotional stress around what's going on with your family, juggling and managing your children, making sure that they're learning. So all of these factors are just weaved all through the list that Deidre is going over. You have to be creative. You have to be persuasive in your own mind. It's a lot of self-talk, right?
Yes.
Self-talk, telling yourself that I can do this. I'm going to be able to catch on to this, so it's not a barrier for me. And the collaboration could also be when you reach out to one of your colleagues who's a little more tech savvy than you are and say, can we jump on outside of this and you kind of help me navigate before the next meeting? All of that is that part of that adaptability and creativity, and making sure that you're understanding the stress that this time, even if it's not in your own home. I live by myself. I don't have the stressors of children, but this, just because this is happening in the world and happening to my friends outside of me, I have to manage my thoughts around the subject so that I can calm my mind and focus in on what it is that I need to do.
You are nailing it. I had that hearty laugh because when you were talking about don't be so hard on yourself. When I had that meltdown one day in our meeting where I did the Adobe Connect. Remember the Adobe Connect story? So I did a webinar on Adobe Connect. I have my own license. I've been using it for years, and they've done some enhancements to it. So the way that I used to use it, and I actually practice. I put all my family, I said, hey, we're having an Adobe Connect test meeting at such and such. I put it on their calendar and we practice. So in the midst of the actual live webinar, the breakout rooms did not work. And people got kicked out, and I was like, oh my gosh. So here I am, an expert in learning, helping others, teaching them 5 tips on how to convert their training to a virtual classroom, and my breakout rooms don't work. So what I had to do is, after Wanda, I say, talk me off the ledge, she helped me bring myself to, okay, what can I do? So what I did is I actually took that opportunity, which is what being adaptable is about, is adjusting to new opportunities. I use that as an opportunity to write a blog about my experience. I let people know I was being authentic, that, it doesn't always work. Even those of us that are trained to do it, it doesn't always work. So don't be hard on yourself. Don't be afraid to try. And if it doesn't work, then what can you do differently for the next time? And so that's all about being adaptable. And you actually got us on to the next one, which is emotional intelligence. And you explained it perfectly, when you have to be self-aware enough to know, okay, here are my emotions, here's what I'm feeling, but you also have to be able to read people virtually. So I have to read your emotions. You could tell that I was in not a happy place after that webinar, and you read me virtually, and then you were able to help me get past that. You coached me in the moment, got me past that, and then we were able to be productive and plan this wonderful event that we're doing today.
Yes, these soft skills are huge, but I have to say emotional intelligence is one of my favorites. It's a topic I've trained on and coached on quite a bit, because it touches every facet of our lives. And unfortunately, for years, emotions were a bad word. But now corporate America has embraced the idea that emotions are okay. We just need to utilize them in our people skills, and it actually helps us to recognize certain things, be better leaders, be better managers when we have that emotional intelligence. And I'm sure right now it is such a huge boost to your ability to adapt during this time if you have emotional intelligence, if your EQ is higher, so you're able to manage those things that are coming at you personally, and even at work, because the transition for some people has not happened. Some people are out of work, but they're trying to learn new skills so they can get a different kind of job so this won't happen to them. Deidre, I see a raised hand from Michelle. I'm going to allow her to talk.
All right.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for hosting this. I do appreciate it.
Hi.
Absolutely.
I just want to share something about emotional intelligence, only because it occurred about 2 days ago. So I was leading a group of SMEs, and they're mostly guys and subject matter experts, and they're mostly guys, and they didn't want to come on camera. And as we're going through trying to develop the flow and the learning objectives for the course, it got really quiet. And I said to them, if you don't come on camera, I can't see your body language. Therefore, I can't read how you're responding to what we're doing. So if you're not going to be on camera, I'm going to have to encourage you to really get over your reticence and talk. Otherwise, turn your camera on so I can see your facial expressions.
Yes.
Excellent point, Michelle. Excellent. I encountered that with doing virtual team building. Can you imagine? So this was my first time doing virtual team building. We had a team building session scheduled, and they wanted to continue on. I said, you know what, let's do it virtually. And that, just what you described, in order to really do team building, I have to be able to read the room. I have to be able to read the reactions of the people, especially when organizations are having some challenging times, some issues. You have to be able to see, just like you would in a classroom, if something's not sitting well with them, or if people like what you're saying. So I encourage them to use thumbs up, or, let me know that this is something that you agree with. I even had them raise their hands to agree with, what we were talking about, because it is super important, even more so, like you said, persuading people to keep their cameras on.
Yeah. And that's actually a best practice that I teach when I'm helping to transition people to a virtual platform, is that yes, everyone needs to have their cameras on. Now, this is a webinar, it's a different situation, but when you are in a training session, especially in times like this, you want people to have their cameras on, to be present. This is not just a business meeting. This is a time where you have to be able, just like if you were in the classroom, you could see them. And then I had to encourage some of the instructors, the facilitators, you need your camera on. We can't just have a pretty picture up there of you. They need to see that you're engaged and read your facial expressions and feel your energy and how excited you are. That helps motivate them to show up in the classroom when you show up in the classroom, even if it's virtually. So the camera needs to be on for the participants as well as the instructor, because believe it or not, some instructors don't know that, they set the atmosphere, and that ability for emotional intelligence is something for a couple of our generations that they're having to learn how to read body language, because they grew up texting and DMing and not looking at a person in the face. And so it's a skill that used to be commonly known, but now it's something that, as a part of emotional intelligence, it's being taught again to a generation, to two generations now, who have lived through text messages and direct messages and not sitting and talking to somebody face to face. Now those generations are used to using the video camera now. And so they're becoming more keen, but for probably 10 or so years, we were really on that texting, and there was that lack of understanding. So emotional intelligence is touching so many facets of our lives. And like I said, corporate America needed it because it was denying it.
You know what's interesting, Wanda, and I know we have a question. I think Marva has raised her hand.
Okay.
But I just find it interesting when, like, my son, I have these two, I call them grown kids in my house now. We went from empty nest to full nest again, with two college age, one graduating and one freshman, but they don't like to be on the camera. And I'm like, as much as this generation, and I'm just generalizing here, but it's like, look at me, take a picture, I'm eating, look at this. They want to put on their best face. And so many of us, this is just, I haven't put on makeup except for lips and eyeliner for the whole time. And I'm okay with that. Like, it's just like, be natural. Haven't had your hair done, you got to do it yourself. But so many of them are not. Like, my son is doing Zoom meetings and he's just like, he doesn't have his camera on. And I'm like, wow, I just find that I use my camera way more than you use yours. So
That's interesting. You know, that's a rarity. Let's see, Marva, I'm gonna allow you to talk. Sorry, you had to hold on for a second. How are you?
Oh, you're fine. You're fine. Good afternoon, and thank you for hosting this. This is great dialogue. Emotional intelligence is paramount. I had a situation where we were interviewing for central office position in our school district, and one of our other administrators continued throughout the interviews to not show their face. And so I consider that kind of, I don't know, kind of a almost not necessarily coming across as rude, but just kind of a lack of professionalism, because if I had to put myself in the position of the interviewee and everyone else had their cameras on except for the one individual, and finally just shared with the HR person, director, we need to make sure we disseminate some type of virtual platform etiquette tips. You know, we have to do such. And then, you know, just make sure folks understand that when you're interviewing, it really makes a difference for your face to be shown on the camera. So I completely concur with the emotional intelligence piece.
absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for that feedback. Does anybody else have any experiences during COVID-19 that they know has affected their learning, the learning of their peers or direct reports, or family members that fall into the need for these soft skills that have been, that we've talked about during the webinar? You can raise your hand if you have anything that you want to add into that. But one of the factors that, as I've been doing research during COVID-19, not only observing myself and some of my colleagues that I've been interacting with, is just how unprepared the whole world was for this, because it was unexpected. But for it to touch so many different areas of our lives, unprepared for its impact, and it's something that we'll be studying and researching for years to come, the impact of COVID-19 in all the different areas. And one of the things that I'm going to do, and Deidre and I have discussed this as well, doing it together, we're going to be doing interviews for anyone who wants to, interviews for parents, and how COVID-19 has affected the learning of their children, of them personally, so we can document our story. We can document how this has impacted us. We need to get everybody's voice heard about how their learning has been impacted during this particular time. So please keep your minds open to this, and I'm going to send out communication, and Deidre will be sending out communication for those who are willing to do just a quick 3-question interview about how COVID-19 has affected you emotionally, mentally, and in your physical space, how it's impacted your learning. So this global impact is something that we will be looking at forever. And for the educators on this call, the administrators, those who are running school systems, districts, this is some documentation that I'm sure you're gaining a lot of insight on, as to things that need to change and need to be adjusted, not just for your students, your learners, but for your teachers and all across the board.
Absolutely. Wanda, this is a knowledge management case study where you can document, like you said, what we're going to be doing, documenting stories. How are things impacted? What needs to change? Who can we pull in? Who has the expertise to help us move forward? We had to adjust to closing a system, an entire country, And now we're working on reopening the country. What skills are needed? What learning needs to happen in order for us to do that? It's really a breeding ground for learning agility, where you're learning things in the moment, you're reflecting on what did we learn, and then you're doing an adjustment going forward. So what can we do differently going forward? So it's like after action reviews every single day with from did the Zoom meeting work to how did that webinar turn out to virtual training, doing performance reviews virtually. You know, the HR world is really, really struggling right now with how do we bring employees back into the workplace. People who are not trainers are being asked to train people in the do's and don'ts of social distancing. You know, so these are all opportunities to learn new skills, to tap into your networks, people who have the expertise that you don't. Wanda is joint with me at the hip with the technology because that's not my area, but she will always jump on a Zoom call and do a walkthrough with me to help me with a certain area that I'm having trouble with. So just thinking out of the box and you know, creativity, collaborating, it's all of those things that happen. We're developing those skills every single day.
Yes, I'm an agile practitioner, and one of the things that happens in agile is you always have this retrospective. How well did we do? And I love what you just said, Deidre, is, you know, every day at this point, you know, after your meetings all day, even if you just have a retrospective with yourself, document what went well and what didn't go well, because in a time like this, you need that documentation. I love your point, you know, it's a case study happening. And, you know, for those who are wise, you're documenting everything while it's happening, because when we come out of this, it's going to be like,
yes,
when that finally happens. So as we're taking notes now, as we're monitoring our emotional state, the emotional state of our peers, our employees, of our children, if we document this, if we really take the time to say, this is how it affected at first, and then maybe for a month in and 2 months in, and God forbid 6 months in, you know, this is what the effect has been from our perspective, from a learning perspective. That's the way I'm looking at things, to document. But whatever your niche is in learning and education, whether it's childhood development, whether it is you're an adult, you work with adult learners, you know, taking the time to document now and get your some additional learning in. This is causing that creativity and adaptability is causing us to gain new skill sets, to dive into those things that we might have left to someone else who was sitting next to us, you know, or down the hall. We could run and ask them, you know, what have you done? Now we have to collaborate in a different way, or take that time to learn how to do it on our own. So it's a great time to sharpen our own skills.
absolutely.
I can't remember.
Actually,
Go ahead.
The book that I wrote, which is a journal, is called Don't Get Left Behind. And it is to walk you through, it's to change your behavior in learning. So how do you take charge of your development in 30 days? And it really reframes how you approach learning. You make it a part of your everyday activities. So it asks you 4 questions. You know, what did you learn? What do you need to learn? It's escaping me the last 2, but it's asking you questions. You set aside 10 minutes at the end of your day, reflect on your learning, write it down, and you'll have your case study written for 30 days, just putting it in some type of a journal. So it is so important. It's how we live our lives, but we encourage everybody to just to reflect on what we're going through, and don't let it be something that we went through and we didn't learn anything from it.
Right. From our answers from registration, Mildred and Jacqueline specifically said that they're taking this time to kind of ramp up on their training. So they're taking that time to really utilize some of the skills that we talked about and taking advantage of this time. So I think that's excellent. So positives to coming out of this. Yeah. Yeah, so I think that there is a whole lot of positive that can come out of this. I know sometimes we focus on the negative, and we're empathetic and sympathetic to its impact on others. So we always have to be aware of that. But there's always space for to learn, to grow, to become better through any type of adversity. That's been documented throughout history.
Absolutely. I want to chime into Michelle's comment about the flipped classroom.
Mm-hmm.
That is like my thing. So flipped classroom, this is a perfect opportunity to create flipped classrooms. Let me just give you the quick version of what that is. You give people content. So a lot of our learning events or activities we're presenting information.
Right.
Well, if you present the information in a video or some type of self-directed learning prior to coming together and collaborating, then the collaboration is more deliberate. It's more relevant. We have conversations. We discuss things in the moment. So you're taking advantage of the people in the room where they're not being passive learners, but they're being more active in their learning. And so this has created, I promote that with my clients that, there's no reason for me to sit here and give you topics and concepts and principles. You can read that on your own. Yeah. What I want us to do in the classroom is to collaborate and talk about, so how does that relate to the real world? How does that relate to your work environment or your family or your professional development? And so this is definitely an opportunity where you're seeing a lot of videos where people are getting content that way. LinkedIn Learning is great for that. Like, they have a lot of good content, but then you can follow up and have some group conversations about, so what did we learn? How will we apply what we learned? So thank you, Michelle, for that.
Yeah, that's excellent. I love flipped classrooms as well. In a technical space, as a technical college professor, that allowed us to do some more deep learning in comprehension of the information when the labs had to be done first. They had to fight through some knowledge and bump their heads and figure out what they didn't know. And then when we came together, the collaboration, working together, which happens in most workspaces. If it's something you don't understand, you collaborate, you work together, you figure it out. So I love the flipped classroom concept, have used it a lot throughout the years, but yes, it's something that we we'll probably be using a lot more from here on.
Did you know that they're teaching medical students that way now?
I did not.
Yes, they're getting away from the lecture, the one-way passive. Not all instructors, because some of them are struggling in this this COVID crisis with engaging their students. But some medical, and I can't remember the school, I read an article maybe a couple of years ago where they're actually doing more flipped classroom to teach medical students, because it's really more practical for them to do the hands-on and learn the concepts and then practice them in the classroom.
Yeah. I have a question from Michelle about adjusting lab training to the virtual space. This is something we've actually been doing for years. There are virtual simulations that are out there, from everything from cybersecurity to putting a computer part together, recognizing it where it's going to be, because technology has advanced so much that there are virtual simulations that you can do for the lab portion of technical learning. Now, it's for me, and I might just be old school. It's never going to replace actually being full hands-on in a lab, but it does a great job mimicking, touching this part, interacting this way, building scenarios that would happen in a real job or with a real customer. So there are a lot of simulations that take the place of those labs. And this has been happening for about 10, 15 years now. Of course, they've gotten better They
Yes.
weren't as good. So that's how that lab training is answering.
Absolutely. So I know that there was some questions about an emotional intelligence book. So I've already said that we would share a couple of our resources. I have my library behind me and beside me and in the other room. So I'll have to take a look and see what I have. But it's definitely a topic that both Wanda and I are super interested in. And we geek out about emotional intelligence. Like, I think that was one of the drivers of doing this was we were like emotional intelligence and staying focused. And so it's something we enjoy.
Yeah, so we definitely will. We have everybody's email address. We can follow up with some resources that are available through both of our companies. I introduced myself, but you know what? I didn't say the name of my business. My business is We LLC Consulting Solutions. I told you what I did, but I'm always available to come in and do consult with you and figure out what your needs are. I do learning strategy like Deidre. I specialize in the niche of how can technology impact your organization. What's the best way for your employees to learn, not just during COVID, but any point, and how technology intersects with that, with instructional design, e-learning courses, all of those things. So I'm available at any point for you to reach out and do a free consultation if you think that that's a need for your area. Deidre?
Same here. I don't know if I'm wearing my shirt, but I'm the founder and CEO of Concerning Learning, and Wanda and I do very similar things, except she is the technology person, not me. But we work in partnership depending on what the project is. So I help organizations with their learning strategy as well, looking at the business needs and making sure that your learning strategy is aligned with that. That you have the right content and the right programs, leadership, mentoring, onboarding, succession planning, knowledge management, and employee development. And then also making sure that your training department, they have the right knowledge and skills in order to implement and execute your training programs properly, design them so that you're not reliant on a consultant all the time. Our job is to help basically talk ourselves out of an immediate job, and then hopefully you'll bring us back for some other stuff. But we empower you to be able to take what we're giving you in order to do it for yourself. And hopefully it's a continuous thing. So there's always a need to bring us back in.
Exactly. All right. Well, we are right. I think we're at an hour and 48 minutes. So we're coming close to I'm up on an hour, 48 minutes into the hour. Yeah, I was like, we were really talking, weren't we?
Not that much.
Not that much. No, we're not enjoying ourselves that much. So I just want to open the floor, if that's okay with you, Deidre.
Yes.
If there are any, final comments, if anyone wants to share any kind of scenarios that's happening with you right now. Because we said join our conversation, and I've loved the questions and even the responses that come through the question and answer, and thank you for participating that way. But just want to open the floor before we end this conversation, this webinar on learning during COVID-19. All right, unmute. Michelle?
Yeah, one of the things I want to share as we're in COVID-19 and people are having to go virtual, I want to emphasize to people that it's not just about taking face-to-face classroom training or education that you have now and just going into Zoom and presenting it. That often, and particularly for technical training, often we need to go step back and do an analysis, because in some instances, it may not work online, it may not work virtually, and then we have to think about what is the workaround and what is the cost if we actually have to build simulations for labs. So I just want everyone to be mindful of the fact that you do need to do some analysis and some assessment before you just throw things online or virtually.
Spoken like a fellow instructional designer. Thank you, Michelle. Yes. That is something that makes us instructional designers cringe when we just see PowerPoints thrown into a system, and that's training, because we know that that is not going to lead to much learning. We call it a data dump or a page turner. So we don't want those. So thanks, Michelle.
Yeah. That's a definite need for, as Deidre said, instructional designers. There has to be, that's the first part, analysis of the particular situation. All right, I see hand up from Mildred. Let me allow her to talk.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi. I really appreciate this opportunity to collaborate and get feedback from everyone. But also, I appreciate the information that I'm getting globally. I've been taking advantage of webinars. Yesterday, I was on one hosted in Great Britain and Poland, the day before in Australia. And it's really challenging for me for different learning styles, especially from a technology standpoint, the different platforms people are using for learning, and it's challenging me in a good way. So for that, I am truly appreciative, and to keep me in mind as other opportunities come up for learning and development.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mildred. And I love that, challenging you in a good way. I think that's how we all need to look at it, because it's accelerating our growth, right? We have to get this.
Yes.
So the challenge in a good way.
Absolutely. I'm going to start a series called Rescue My Training Live, and it's going to be virtual meetups for SMEs, subject matter experts, who we talk about your passions, your pains, and your pressures in terms of creating learning experiences. And it's just going to be conversations and providing some real life discussion and practical solutions specific to those people who are not formally trained as instructional designers, but are subject matter experts that have been asked to do training. So that's coming up. I'll be starting it next month.
I'm excited about that. I think what Michelle said is so important. There are people who are being asked, and Deidre, you said this earlier as well, they're being asked to do training and they're not trainers, in order to, do their job. And they're being asked to do it over a technology that they might not be familiar with. So I just, as bringing in EQ again, it's one of those things that I like to encourage when I'm coaching people, is to be kind to yourself, to be very aware that the challenge is there. That does not mean that you don't continue to try and grow and figure it out, but you can't beat yourself up for what you don't know. You could be grateful for what you have accomplished up to this point. I love mindfulness, other things I've been practicing for years, but we have to be kind to ourselves. We can't add additional stress to our lives just because we're not doing something immediately in a perfect way.
Absolutely. Well, this has been wonderful. We can talk about this all day, but I want to give people back their time in their days, because if your days are like ours, we probably are more busy now than we were before. So this has been a great conversation. I think we're going to do more real talks. So if you have any suggestions for topics, I think we're open to that. I didn't discuss that with Wanda. I just threw that out there, but I know she's with me. I am. So we would love to continue conversations and learn from each other. We're not the smartest people in the room. We bring people together so we can all learn, share, and grow.
That's right. Excellent. Great closing. Well, thank you to everybody who has attended. Mr. Berry, I thought I would hear your voice before this webinar was over. Yes, I'm calling you out. So I guess you don't want to have any feedback, but thank you to everyone who has contributed verbally, and everyone who contributed in the question and answer. Please be ready. Tell others the great time that you had on this Real Talk. It will be a series. We will be having more conversations. So spread the word. We'd love to see you again at another Real Talk.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.